In a democracy, citizens need to be informed. Informed about policies, issues, homelessness, law enforcement, and social services. In order for people to make good decisions that affect their lives, they need to be informed. Conversations with Erroll Parker. Dr. Felton Williams is on the Board of Education for the Long Beach Unified School District. And he has been on there for several years, and he has a strategy of how academic performance of African American students, especially boys, can be improved. Now, this is going to be quite a struggle for him. His strategy is to get black churches together to help improve the performance of African American students. And he's here on Conversations with Erroll Parker to talk about that. Welcome to our program, Dr. Williams. You have been reading the book, No More Cotton to Pick. Now, that's a pretty provocative title. I mean, the cotton industry has been decimated, at least as far as African Americans and being enslaved is concerned. What is the motivation, what is the theme behind this in education of African American students?
Well, what that article points out is the reason why Africans were brought to America, primarily to pick cotton. Now there's no more need for that to happen in terms of the picking of cotton. Machinery does that now. So the article is suggesting that out of the 38 million African Americans in America, what do you do with them now since there's no more cotton to pick? What needs to happen? And that article suggests that 38 million is an excess on America, that something needs to take place to excise that 38 million. And the article goes on to talk about some of the situations that are part of that 38 million: lack of work, low performance in schools, hanging out on street corners, drugs, and so forth and so on, which represents a scourge on America. So they talk about a certain portion of that 38 million, but not the other portion that are doing good things, doctors and lawyers and so forth and so on. But even as you look at the current climate today, you have a president in office who's trying to excoriate certain groups that they don't feel belong in America. That's why that article has relevance.
So race is an issue in America, and the historical reasons why Africans were brought to America was to bolster the cotton industry. Now that industry is not pervasive, so now what do you do with the 38 million?
What do you do with the 38 million African Americans?
You have a strategy about that, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to invite you on the program. You have data showing the low performance of African Americans, the national data, even though you're a Long Beach board member, but there's national data. Long Beach is no different than other cities in terms of this issue. But you have a strategy. You're saying that in order to mitigate this and improve performance, let's partner with the predominantly African American church congregations. Why are you selecting them as opposed to other groups?
Let me also say this. I also chaired an organization called the Council of the Great City Schools, which is a national organization that represents 75 of the nation's largest urban school districts. So within that context, not only do I understand the situation locally in terms of the performance of African American students academically, but I understand it from a national level as well, having chaired that organization and still being a member of that organization's executive committee. The council school districts have 7.2 million students that are part of that. So it's a very large segment of our student population nationally.
So you have a handle on the issue in terms of data, in terms of performance?
I absolutely do, being served in that capacity. That coupled with my work early years as chairman of Region 1 NAACP, representing the 9 Western states.
That's a pretty good perspective. NAACP, which is an advocate group over 100 years, and then an organization that has its handle on the national issue of some educational issues.
Right.
So what's your strategy?
I'm looking at all of this in terms of what I see as a potential support base that could help drive some positive changes in the performance of kids of color. The single most institution that we have in America as African Americans is the African American Church. And in the early years, the African American Church, prior to the Civil Rights Movement, was really the soul of the African American community. Through that process, a lot of positive things were happening in the African American community as a result of the church's role in that community, up to and including the passage of the Civil Rights Act. Seemingly after the passage of the act, and as we move forward, that advocacy role by some of the black churches went in a different direction.
What direction?
They were influenced greatly by mega churches that were bringing in lots of dollars and doing lots of, the Tammy Bakers and all of those folks who were out, the Reverend Prices and so forth, being able to show that you can get wealthy in the church. And so the advocacy role began to diminish quite a bit in the African American church as they begin to make adjustments.
That is great insight, Dr. Williams. That's something I knew, but I think when people think about it, they really didn't really trip on that. But I think that's, in my at least, I agree with you, that historical analysis is correct. But it begs the question, since the African American church may not be as much as the soul of the black community as it once was, but you still say, let's go to them anyway and collaborate with us to improve performance. Why?
I say that because that's pretty much the only institution in the African American community that we have a strong relationship with. And given that, I think it's necessary to re-engage the African American church into the problems that we're having in our schools. And I have worked with some ministers.
Local ministers.
I have met with local ministers, and I'm working with local ministers now that are working to engage our students and their parents in providing areas of support for our kids. And let me give you an example of that. First and foremost, our churches need to understand the data. And the data drives a lot of the things that are occurring in our schools.
What data are you referring to?
I'm talking about student performance data.
Okay.
The academic data of the kids in our schools.
And on a national level?
No,
on
here
a local,
locally.
Okay.
And the churches need to work locally with their local schools. But it needs to be looked at as a national model that can be adopted nationally. And they bring a great deal of resources that they have sitting in those churches. They have retired school personnel in those churches. Oftentimes, those school personnel bring a lot of expertise that can be used to assist kids in our district. As an example, kids who are having difficulties at home, we have retired counselors, school psychologists, and all of that who are sitting in those churches. Why not deploy those people to work with some of these kids? Why not look at a way to help support some of the work of our schools? Our schools need lots of help, and even in a district like Long Beach. And let me just talk about what that means for a minute. Long Beach has over 1,500 business partners. Those business partners provide a lot of support for our schools and our students. As an example, there's an organization that does free eye exams for our kids. And if the student needs eyeglasses, they provide those free. How that student performs as a result of that is important, because now that student has eyeglasses, and whatever problems may have been part of that student's life prior to that all of a sudden they've changed. Well, it's no different, really no different in looking at the church as a partner. Bringing the church in as one of our partners to help do some of the work that's necessary to move our kids. As I'm looking at the data here of just our kids here in Long Beach, by ethnicity, on the statewide tests that our kids take, the SBAC, in two areas, English language arts and math. 37%, and this is district compared to the state, 37% of our students who are African Americans have met or exceeded standards on the SBAC. 37% out of 100%. Now the state average is 32%, so we beat the state average. But if we're beating the state average, that tells you how many of our kids of color are having problems.
Now you say kids of color or
African American kids
okay, all right.
are having difficulty. The same is true with math. 26% of our kids here in Long Beach met or exceeded the standards on the SBAC, compared with 20% at the state level. So again, we're looking at the increasing difficult problem of our kids performing in English language arts and in math. Not only do I see it here locally, but I see it nationally as well. And that begs a question about what these kids will be able to do when they matriculate from school without the necessary skills to be good fathers, to be good providers, to go out and take care of their families, and to contribute to the growth and development of the community.
Well, it seems to me that that could be an innovative way to improve performance. And you're working in the city of Baltimore with a pastor and doing the same thing. Tell us the success that Reverend Phillips in Baltimore, and we've said in private conversations that he's succeeding in this issue. Tell us about that.
We have a pastor, Pastor Phillips of the Greater Kingdom Church in Baltimore. And it's just a mere coincidence that we happened to meet, and that was through a colleague. Pastor Phillips is pastor of one of a very large church in Baltimore. And he's also affiliated with T.D. Jakes. Pastor Phillips is working to improve the performance of kids in the Baltimore City School District. One of the parts of that is he has basically said to people in his church, we've got a truancy problem here in our school district. So they're knocking on doors getting kids back in school. They're also running after-school tutorial programs, reading programs to help the kids improve their reading. And this is through the work of their large number of retired personnel, school personnel, who are sitting in those churches. There's a tremendous resource that are sitting in that church. And when you look at that exponentially, we have that same resource nationwide. Could you imagine the impact of those resources being applied to the problems that we're having in our schools? And for a lot of our single parent families who can't afford tutors, who the kids may not have a place to study, that church has opened its doors for the kids to come in and study. We do have somewhat of a similar situation here with one of our churches that has opened its doors to AP testing, Antioch Church through
Reverend Cheney.
Reverend Cheney. But being able to take gestures like that and move those gestures to improving the performance of our students of color, I think adds significance to the struggle that these kids are facing.
Well, now you're presupposing, Dr. Williams, and just taking a different issue, not necessarily my own, but I want to stretch you a little bit here. You're presupposing that pastors want to do what you want to do. African American pastors wanting to do what you want to do. That's an assumption that you're going off. What gives you reason to believe that African American pastors who are pastors of predominantly African American congregations would collaborate with you on this?
I think we've got some of that's in proof. As I mentioned, Pastor Phillips, I mentioned Pastor Cheney, and recently we have another pastor here in Long Beach, Sean McMillan at St. Mark, just as some example. But I think they need to understand the scope and complexity of this situation. How does improving the academic outcomes of kids of color impact the community and they're a part of the community? If you have improvement in kids graduating, going to college, running stable families, becoming church members, all that adds to everybody's ballpark.
Well, that's another assumption. And I'm not saying that that's not true. I'm just trying to stretch you a little bit. You're saying that if I'm as a pastor, collaborate with you, then it's going to benefit my church in terms of my academic performance. Now, we're looking at gentrification in the African American community. Churches, and it's happening nationally, that once was predominantly African American around that church facility is no longer the case. Mm-hmm. We have churches now where there are elderly people and in an absence of young people. Many of the families, because of gentrification, has moved away.
Okay.
In the North Valley and Inland Empire, and has left congregations in the inner city of Long Beach. The demographics have changed. Does that have any impact upon the effort that you're making?
But you still have African American kids in the schools. And those kids still need help and they need assistance. Wherever they may live and go back to, but they're still in our schools. And these churches can still contribute to the academic outcomes of these kids. Now, that begs the question of how that may benefit them by investing those resources. But given the need and given the expertise of some of those folks in those churches who may not be investing their time and their energy in working with these kids, here's an opportunity to get some things done. Here's an opportunity to say, we have worked to help improve the graduation rates of X number of kids in the district by our work, have helped to reduce the gang violence that plagues a lot of what we do in our city. We have helped to make our city a safer place. These are all positive outcomes that can result from the church's involvement.
Okay, let's go in a slightly different direction here. My wife, who worked with you at Cal State Dominguez Hills, has an annual event called Super Sunday, mm-hmm. Super Saturday. And they go to the churches, the African American churches and the Latino churches, to get students to come in and start the process of going to higher education. She has no problem getting Latino parents. They're here, they see the opportunities in America. They're hungry, as we were back 40 years ago. Mm-hmm. But she has a struggle getting the pastors and the black parents to come to these meetings to talk about getting their children involved in post-secondary education, whether it's vocational education or whether it's college prep. That's a phenomenon that exists in our community. And you're talking about going to those same churches to try to get cooperation.
And I won't deny that. It's a perennial problem. But if I were to say that that I will not continue to pursue that, then that onus is on me.
Absolutely.
That onus is on me to find a way to bring those folks to the table.
And that's great. Now, this strategy that you're talking about can work, but pastors are motivated differently than they used to be. Mega churches, accountabilities, shrinking membership. That's the challenge that you face here. And I admire the fact that you say that despite the negativism is out there and the trend is going south, you feel by bringing those pastors in that you can convince them to impact this performance.
If you're able to even work with one and turn some things around and let that one be an example for the others, you begin to open the door to what the possibilities are. We have in Atlanta a number of churches in Atlanta that are working with their schools. And Atlanta is, and you just saw the results of the most recent election, some good things are happening in Atlanta, Georgia. Those churches have pretty much stayed true to the mantra of giving back to their communities. They have not forgotten their advocacy roles in the African American community. But it's really a matter of seeing how you can get that, re-engage that with our churches and getting them to the point where they see the value in that and they see the benefit from it. And I've been at it for a while, and I won't say it's been an easy piece to deal with, but I do see progress.
Okay, let's switch reels. You have been a board member for how long now?
For 15 years.
15 years. Cite for me what you feel like is some of your greatest accomplishments, as well as some of your great disappointments in 15 years.
Well, let's say in the 14 plus years that I've been a member of the board, we've done many, many things on that board. Bringing in the process of strategic goal planning was one, where the district is now utilizing strategic goals as part of their work. Advocating for a communications piece where the district now communicates with its diverse audience, public audience, in terms of the processes that we use to get our information out to our diverse audiences, and not just assuming that our messages are being understood, but making sure that we look at how that's being done. The strategic goals, the advanced placement programs that we were able to bring in more African American students as part of that process, from 500 back in 2014 to over 3,000 African American students who are taking AP classes today. Mm-hmm. And the district won a national award for that, for the increased participation of African American students. I would say, in retrospect and looking at the work, and there's been a lot of work, I mentioned just a few of those, but that work was reflected in the award that I received nationally, the Green Garner Award for the Outstanding Urban Educator of the Year last year.
Congratulations.
But the work in the district was actually a reflection of that award that I received nationally.
Disappointments?
Not really. I don't have disappointments. I just have hopes and aspirations about tomorrow. I can't hang my hat on disappointments because I would not get anything done if I did. But to look at a way to move through those areas of resistance to make some results, to get some results.
What was one of the things that you have not done that you really want to do before your time is up?
Well, we're currently working right now and seeing if we can bring in more African American teachers in the lower grades. Those numbers have gone way down, and for lots of reasons. And why am I looking at African American teachers? Well, these folks, the teachers, tend to understand the behavioral aspects of African American boys, because most of them have been through it. So rather than these boys being suspended or channeled into low-performing classes, these teachers can work with these kids, I think, in a way that prevents a lot of that from occurring. So that's important to me to look at how we get that done. And we have a partnership with the College of Education at Long Beach State that's working on that right now.
Do you feel an extra burden or responsibility being the only African American on the board?
I think what's at stake here is allowing people to see that students are students, and that what we do for one student, we do for the other, and making sure that we understand the process of equity and what that means district-wide. Long Beach is a school district that I think has recognized that and is moving forward and expending those resources where necessary to make sure that equity is occurring across our district. I'm very pleased with that, and I'm very pleased with the ability to work with my colleagues, my board colleagues, on this process of equity and fairness in our district.
Dr. Felton Williams, thank you so much for the short notice that I gave you to be on this program, but you had a platform to talk about this new strategy, which I think is really fascinating, and anything that I can do to help you achieve that, of course, I will. Thank you so much for being
You're
on the
quite
program.
welcome, and thank you for inviting me, Erroll. I appreciate it.
Dr. Felton Williams is the only African American on the Board of Education. He's been there for 14 years. He's got a tremendous strategy and hope to improve the academic performance of African American students, especially African American boys. Thank you for being on the program.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining me on Conversations with Erroll Parker. We'll see you next time. In a democracy, citizens need to be informed. Informed about policies, issues, homelessness, law enforcement, and social services. In order for people to make good decisions that affect their lives, they need to be informed. Conversations with Erroll Parker.